Come on then, let's be having ya. Talk of the Trinity.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Talk of the Trinity podcast. I'm Baz Barrett. I have escaped the void. For those who were watching, listening last night, I've gone from one void to a slightly more glamorous void. And also, speaking of upgrades, I am joined by Mr. Will Forrest this time around from a even more glamorous locale than he has been acquainting, although he very much enjoys sharing his adventures out and about. In terms of those of you watching the YouTube version, seeing the introductions, you know, I mean, you got to take your joy where you can nowadays, which is perfect in terms of listening to this podcast, taking your joy where you can in terms of when we're talking about all things Villa. And what we're going to be talking about in this edition of the podcast is the upcoming Norwich City game at Carrow Road, Tuesday night, 7:45 on BT. Other providers are probably available in terms of the game as well. So coming to you, Will, the minor detail of a reunion with an old friend, which, like all good reunions, I guess, came a lot sooner than probably either party would have wanted it to, but it's going to be dominating the game.
Yeah, definitely. You know, Dean Smith, and not forgetting Emi Buendia. There's a lot of hype around him at the moment too. It'll be good to see what Dean Smith's Norwich look like, and I'm sure Dean Smith will be just as intrigued to see what, as the media have labelled it, Steven Gerrard's Aston Villa look like as well. Should make for an entertaining game, I reckon. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be, I suppose with Dean Smith, the advantage is that it's at Norwich first. So you'd think, I'm not that you get a bad reception at Villa. I mean, I think when the return fixture happens, and he's going to get a good return from the whole 10 anyway. But, you know, I'd say home comforts, but it probably feels more strange to him than being at Villa, like in terms of obviously still probably finding his way around Carrow Road, and wonder how many times Delia's invited him up to her box, kind of there for some celebratory sherry. But you'd expect in terms of Villa, and as you mentioned, Steven Gerrard's Aston Villa now, that will be approaching the game in a professional fashion with a professional manager, because it's from Gerrard's perspective, he had his big reunion on Saturday. So this is going to be, from Gerrard's perspective, slightly smaller scale, you'd say, from his perspective. So I think he'll be able to transmit that to the players. And as you mentioned, Emi Buendia, he's going to get a reception from the Norwich fans.
Yeah, he's going to have a point to prove, isn't he, against Norwich, to show just what he can do, and to show them just how much he's been missed by them. And I remember, I think it was on the last time we chatted and whatnot, he was mentioned, you know, expectations are higher for Buendia now that he plays for the Villa. It got me thinking, are expectations actually higher now for Emi Buendia at the Villa than they were at Norwich? And the reason I say that is our expectations get top half Premier League. So yes, it is a number of places higher, but Norwich expect to win the Championship when they're in the Championship, don't they? So if they don't win the Championship or they don't get promotion, that's a lot worse for them than us finishing 11th or 12th. So maybe he'll have a little bit more freedom. I mean, we're expected to beat Norwich, really, despite how well Norwich have been doing, and they played very well towards the end of that game against Man United and caused them no end of chances after Ronaldo had scored one of the Sky 6 penalties that were awarded at the weekend. Not too dissimilar to ourselves. We came into that Liverpool game a lot more after Mo Salah scored his penalty. But I do think that Buendia is going to going to have a bit more freedom about himself, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him start. Gerrard's alluded today in the pre-match press conference that they've wrapped Buendia up in cotton wool a little bit so that he would be ready for this match. Do you think it's because of the obvious Norwich link, or do you think it's more because we should be attacking Norwich and going for the jugular?
I think we've talked about Buendia in recent weeks in terms of wanting to rise to the occasion, rise to the pressure against the bigger teams. No disrespect to Norwich, who we've played in the last couple of weeks, Man City being the standout example, and Leicester as well. I do think there is going to be an element with Buendia of Gerrard in terms of his approach with other players has been, right, go and prove yourself. You know, I'm going to put the faith in you. You need to repay it, and I expect you to do it. Freedom in a sense that, yeah, I mean, creative players like having the opportunity to shine. And I think certainly his insider knowledge of how Norwich are going to play is going to factor into his hands. And I suppose a lesser version of with Grealish, there's one thing knowing what a player is going to do. It's another thing being able to stop it based on the quality of the players that are at the disposal of Norwich. So I do think that is going to be, you know, an interesting subplot to watch, and we'll come on to our starting 11s a bit later on. But the Gerrard Smith on the sidelines, going to be interesting to see how they literally approach it in terms of, you know, whether they're going to be demonstrative in the ref's ear. There was certainly a contrast between Klopp and Gerrard at the weekend. But in terms of more on the field and the tactical approaches and the way in which they have started their respective new jobs, we've obviously talked about Gerrard's impact over the last few weeks. Is there anything in particular that you've seen of Dean Smith at Norwich? When you mentioned that they played quite well against Man United, chasing from behind, and how does that contrast with what Steven Gerrard has brought to Villa?
I think really with Smith, when you look at the results that they've had, he obviously started off very well by beating Southampton and then getting that draw with Wolves, which ironically, if he'd managed to do that for us, maybe he'd still be our manager. I think they've become a bit harder, a bit tougher to break down and a bit tougher to beat. I know they did get spanked by Tottenham, didn't they, really? But they controlled possession against Tottenham. I'm sure Tottenham only had about 40% in that match. It was all they needed, though. Played very well, obviously, against Man U, and it was a penalty that they got. Very similar to the penalty that we gave away in regards to should it really have been given, you know. I think they just look a lot harder to break down, and it's similar to what Steven Gerrard's trying to do for us. Even in defeat, we've looked good and hard to break down. The Salah penalty, as I say, was one of those where you hold your head a little bit that he was given, that it happened, but the saves that Martinez pulled off go to show why he's in the top 6 best goalkeepers in the world. The Robertson and Salah ones in particular. Contra and Mings are looking formidable again, really. Cash been playing well. I do worry about him tracking back sometimes, and John McGinn playing as that second right back against some of the bigger teams that, you know, you touched upon against Man City. And even Target's looking good. You know, that we're looking resolute. But when we go forward, we look like we're creating chances, Liverpool aside, really, where we could score goals. We looked like we could nick an equaliser against City. We looked like we could score more goals against Leicester. We looked phenomenal going forward, really, against them. And we did get 2 goals ruled out, if you like, if you include Watkins' one. So it'll be intriguing. I think Smith will want to attack us and will want to put us under pressure. But I think that plays into our hands a little bit. You know, you look at Norwich and the fact that they've got a lot of new players to the Premier League. They've got Grant Hanley, who I believe is their captain, potentially out missing after that tumble he took against Man United. And I don't say tumble because he's a bit of an older player. He literally tumbled over and landed awkwardly on his shoulder. Hopefully he's not out for too long. But I think it plays into our hands when you've got the creative flair that we have at our disposal, and also the midfield maestros, if you like.
I mean, I think it's interesting you mentioned in terms of Gerrard and Smith, kind of their first months at their respective clubs. If you look at the numbers, the number of goals both teams have scored has gone up. The number of goals they've conceded has gone down. Number of chances faced, gone down. XG, gone up in terms of goals scored. XG down in terms of goals conceded. If you were being, I don't know if harsh is the right word. We mentioned it earlier in terms of expectations. Norwich were in the relegation zone when Dean Smith joined. Expectation was, well, the hope of the board for that change was 17th would be, fantastic for Norwich. They would bite your hand off for 17th, the board. There's been an improvement, you mentioned, in the months since Smith was appointed. Results for Norwich have been pretty good. Performances have been pretty good. So the difference between what Norwich were doing before and what they're doing now, so far, that short-term bounce for Dean Smith demonstrates he's able to do an improvement kind of at that level, that kind of remit. And you're looking in terms of Gerrard, improvement from where Dean Smith was and going higher up the table, and that expectation in terms of the board and what they want from Villa and what they want from Gerrard. Because I think we said at the time, if the expectation for the board would have been to come like 10th, 11th, maybe they wouldn't have got rid of Smith when they did. But one of the reasons we think they got rid of him was Europe. That's what we need to be pushing for. And so Gerrard has so far improved on Smith in terms of that. So it does show that potential hierarchy, and be interested to see what it is at the end of the season, whether those initial impressions have, with a bit more time and evidence behind it, have proven to be correct. But it does demonstrate the levels in football, and you can exceed your level, but then that level can sometimes be below kind of another team's kind of expectation and that level as well. And I do think in terms of, there's always that home crowd expectation to go and attack. And even though Norwich are below Villa in the league, I do think the home fans will mark this down as a potential for them in terms of getting some points in their relegation battle. So I do agree with you that there's going to be an encouragement from the home support to go and attack Villa. Kind of even before Dean Smith, there's been recent history in terms of Villa and Norwich, in terms of managers, and a few tasty fixtures that have happened since then. A particular cup quarter-final I can remember for the return of Paul Lambert, and I think Norwich had great delight. I think they beat us in the season that we got relegated, but to be fair, that doesn't really say much because pretty much everybody in the league did. But I do think that does, as you say, give the Villa flair players and that midfield as well the opportunity to, if you're trying to create through that middle space to hit teams on the break, which seems to be the Gerrard way at the moment, hitting high up the pitch, quick transitions, then potentially Norwich could be a perfect opponent for Villa. Or depends on the way Villa approach, obviously, and the way they play. And I think we'll touch upon Villa a little more. But in terms of Norwich and their danger men, is there anybody in that Norwich team who you particularly, I don't know if fearful is the right word, but is anybody who you'll be thinking, if Norwich have a good game, it's going to be because of these particular players who are going to need to step up? Or conversely, if these particular players have a bad game, then it'll be a lot easier for Villa to go in and get the result?
I think there are. I think not only players either. I think Tim Krul has shown that he's still a very good goalkeeper. I don't think he's ever had the credit he really deserved. Great shot stopper, usually very good at saving penalties, as well as he's shown for Holland. Defence-wise, there isn't really anyone. Max Aarons is highly rated, obviously. But then I think you look at the attacking quartet, really, that they could put out. Billy Gilmore, when he's playing, has got a buzz about him. He's a very good player, did very well for Scotland at the Euros. If Todd Cantwell is fit and playing, then you worry about him maybe having that sort of Grealish effect. It seems that Dean Smith has finally got Milo Rashica in his team. Very fast player, cuts in from the right, dangerous left foot, he can hit a rocket. And Teemu Pukki is obviously a goal scorer. He scored goals in the Premier League before, not as prolific as he is in the Championship, but you know, it only takes him one or two chances to actually find the back of the net. The big person who is obviously going to have a massive effect for Norwich is Dean Smith. And I wonder what his approach will be like towards the Villa fans in comparison to Gerrard against Liverpool. Gerrard came out straight to the Villa fans, clapping them, and just put his hand up to the Liverpool fans. They serenaded him. He was unmoved by it. He was very much at the end over to the Villa fans again, you know, congratulated the Liverpool players as he would any opposition's players. And that, I wonder whether Dean Smith comes out, gives the Villa fans a little bit more, so the Villa fans potentially serenade him a little bit, and then he gives the Norwich fans it as well. So he's got all of the ground sort of showing a soft spot for him. As much as we all love Steven Gerrard now, does that then play into Norwich's hands and favour? You get what I mean? Like a little bit of mind games, maybe. Then again, Steven Gerrard and the Villa fans, would the Villa fans let Dean Smith do that to them? Yes, they'd probably give him a clap and sing. They might sing to him, but I think we're very much now behind Steven Gerrard. We've seen what he's got to offer. I've been behind him since day one, as you know, as has Dave Martinez, Dance Dave. I think there's a couple of mind games there that Smith could play if he wanted to, but we'll see. He'll be the danger man because he knows a lot about us. But on the pitch, Teemu Pukki, if he can get any change from Konsa and from Mings, and if I had to pick one of the other players, I'd probably go with Cantwell on the left side, whoever is playing on their left side, just in case Cash bombs on a little bit too much. Is there anybody who you think I've missed out or that you agree with?
I mean, I think in terms of Billy Gilmore, he's been in and out of the side, especially under Daniel Farke. I think he's been brought back into the fold a little bit under Dean Smith. There were certain, perhaps, non-football related reasons why he wasn't in the team. He's a good player if you ignore all that, you know, and I think Dean Smith's taken the approach that Norwich need all the good players they can get and taking the opportunity for a fresh start whilst he's coming, and he has to. I mean, it was interesting hearing some comments he made about Todd Cantwell in that he'd been out the team because he wasn't fit, really, and there may maybe some other issues with the manager, perhaps not trusting him as much due to things he'd seen in training. Dean Smith made a point of putting him back in the team for the first game. And then he seems to have, he hasn't come out and kind of said it explicitly, but reading between the lines, almost appeared to agree with previous kind of comments that have been made that he wasn't fit. And so whether he's going to be eased back into the team gradually or whether it's going to be a situation tomorrow night where, as you mentioned, the atmosphere is going to play a part in this one. And whether getting Cantwell on the field, give the fans an extra lift from the home support. I mean, do I think Dean Smith will make more of a deal about the return than Gerrard did? I mean, yeah, I think he'll acknowledge the Villa fans, but I think the big difference in that is that basically the first question that Gerrard was asked when he took the Villa job was, when you go into Liverpool? Now, really, when you go into Liverpool? And he just built up, you know, literally from day one. And the press conferences and the run up to the Liverpool game were all about the return to Anfield for Gerrard. So it been really been built up. And, you know, sometimes, you know, maybe you've been in a situation where you've had a few drinks and you know that oh yeah, maybe my reactions aren't quite what they were. So you make an extra conscious effort, like to do that thing that you may do when you've had a few too many, like keep your mouth shut, or the opposite potentially on what's going on. So I think Gerrard was he knew what was coming. He almost trained for it, I think, in terms of that reaction. He did exactly what he was going to do. Isn't quite the same pressure for Dean Smith, especially being as though it is at Norwich. So yeah, I think he will give a wave. And I think ultimately he's a Villa fan. So I don't think it's going to be a situation where Dean Smith is going to, kind of turn heel, in front of the Villa fans just to give it up to the Norwich fans. But evidently, it's also not going to be the situation where Dean Smith's going to, run over to the Villa fans to begin with and start serenading them because, he's got a job to do with Norwich. And yeah, I mean, every little trick in the book is going to be needed. If you're going to make a list of hostile grounds, would you put Norwich up there? Probably not. I wouldn't have thought. So anything you need to keep those fans on side, you're going to need to. Not that they turn or anything, but, I mean, he's going to avoid making own goals, but I think he is going to have a bit more leeway in terms of, I think during the game, if the Villa fans start singing to him, I don't necessarily think he'll be waving back too much, but it is in terms of that dugout, in terms of Smith's knowledge of the players and the mentalities. But evidently, Gerrard is playing in a different way to Dean Smith did, and how much time Dean Smith has had on the training field to counteract what you expect Gerrard is going to set Villa up for, in terms of higher up the pitch, as we mentioned, going through counter-attacking phases, not necessarily minding Norwich having the ball. I think especially in terms of allowing a team possession, I think we'll be pretty comfortable allowing Norwich having the ball, especially in their own half, and it's going to be quick pressures in the right area, hit them on the counter. And sounds so easy, really, in terms of sitting here and saying that's what you need to do. But in terms of putting that into action, obviously the first place you start is going to be the starting 11, crossing that white line. So in terms of the starting 11 for tomorrow, fitness depending, obviously, at time of recording, we're not aware of anybody who's been ruled out through injury, who hasn't, already had.
Nakamba's out.
Breaking news, Nakamba is out injured. That is
he's out till January with a knee injury, so maybe he'll miss the AFCON.
That is the perils of being in a void. You get to miss that news. So with Nakamba out, there's going to be at least one change to the team that took the field at Anfield. Do you see any more changes, Will?
I can see a couple of changes, actually. I think Gerrard's got a question to ponder in regards to what formation will Smith play, because he's gone for 5 at the back at Tottenham, didn't he? I'm not too sure of the formation they played against Man United, if I'm honest. But it's one of them where I think they're a bit fluid. They can play a couple of different ones. We're going to go for that 4-3-2-1 as per. For me, I think there's a few players that Gerrard will look to and say, here you go, here's your big chance. You've got a point to prove against Dean Smith, or you've got a point to prove against Norwich. The back 5, including Martinez, stays the same. Target left back, Cash right back, 2 centre-backs, Contra and Mings. Yes, Cash is on is 1 yellow card away from a suspension, but I'm sure we'd rather him be suspended against Burnley than against Chelsea or Leeds in the games that are coming up. Then midfield 3, Dougie Luiz has got to be that holding player. And I think from how well he did passing-wise with his long passes, he made 5 attempts, completed all 5 against Liverpool, and he kept the ball well. I think 84% of his passes were completed, which doesn't sound like the biggest amount, but it's still a very good amount against a strong Liverpool team, and better than I could do against Liverpool. I think he starts as that deep line playmaker. John McGinn, also 1 yellow card away from suspension, and I'm sure he'd love to tell Sean Dyche exactly what he thinks of his coat again, should he wear one at the weekend. McGinn's got to start, really. But if any of the midfielders are going to be rested, it's probably him. I'd start him, and I'd start Sanson as well in midfield. He's got a point to prove. he's regaining fitness. Give him an hour, and then bring on potentially Carney for him, or bring on Iroegbenham into defensive mid and put Louise into centre mid. We've got Jacob Ramsey, Aaron Ramsey, but Sanson starts for me. That'd be my starting base. What about you? Defence and midfield, similar, or?
I think in terms of,
yeah.
well, he can run through walls. I do think the back five, I agree with you. I think it picks itself depending on them all being fit. Louise and McGinn, yep, I think if they're fit, they play. The interesting one is in terms of that third central midfielder, as it were. You mentioned Sanson. Whether Burnley at home might be a better game to give him what appears to be his first start for a very, very long time, rather than Norwich away. That's one thing. If you were going to do that, then I would push Ramsey back from where he was kind of a bit further up the pitch on Saturday against Liverpool. But that's going to depend on his fitness. I mean, you could be, in terms of looking at it, Ramsey plays Tuesday, Sanson plays Saturday. You can make an argument either way, in terms of which one needs the more recuperation, which one needs more the easing in. And if Ramsey plays in centre midfield, which I probably would if he's fit, if he's good to go, I would push him there. And then that quite nicely links into, I think the other change I would make in terms of who's going to play that higher role if Ramsey is part of that midfield three. I think Buendia starts for me. I mean, we mentioned earlier on in the podcast about him going to have a point to prove. I think he's going to get a reception, as we said. So, yeah, I'd whack him on there. There's been talk in terms of, we were mentioning off air that the suggestion that Gerrard was, keeping Buendia ready for this game. Yeah, do it. And that nicely links on to kind of my remaining attacking players. They'd be the same for me that played against Liverpool on Saturday. So I would have Watkins up front and I'd have Young on the left wing, or kind of, well, we're playing that narrow with two behind the one, but, in terms of kind of that left side, I mean, I think his experience is going to play an important factor against Norwich on Tuesday. And again, we're looking in terms of Burnley on Saturday, and we'll be doing a Burnley preview later on in the week, but horses for courses against Burnley. I think somebody with a bit more pace against Burnley on Saturday. If you're going to make changes, then I'd whack one of our youngsters waiting in the wings in terms of playing higher up against Burnley on Saturday, because you know what way Burnley are going to play, and it's in terms of, I think, physicality isn't going to beat Burnley. Pace, trickery is, and not that Young hasn't got that, but I think some fresh legs would work well against Burnley on Saturday, is my view. So Young plays for me in terms of tomorrow night's game against Norwich. What about you? Does Young and Watkins get into your team? I know there could be potentially talk of Danny Ings playing instead of Watkins if he's fit. I mean, as mentioned earlier, he did have a cameo against Liverpool on Saturday. Looked lively when he came on.
Definitely. I'd definitely start Sanson. And the reason I'd start Sanson, midfield, just going back to that, is because I think he's very much made of glass and Burnley could shatter him. Whereas I don't think Norwich are that same sort of team. I think they'll let him play football. Front three, I agree with 2/3 of what you've said. Emi Buendia has to start. I think he gets a good reception from Norwich. He didn't leave on bad terms. I think he'll get applauded. I think he'll get booed when he scores against them. Ollie Watkins has to start as well. Watkins has been fantastic. He's holding the ball up well. He's dropping very deep to get the ball also. And he did that against Liverpool at times, dropping to the left side to play it around so that Buendia could push on. McGinn can push on as well. And I start Danny Ings, and I start Danny Ings up front against Norwich because he's got a point to prove against Dean Smith. I think Ollie Watkins has also got a point to prove against him because he obviously got dropped for a time, if you like, or moved out wider than where he wanted to be. There's talk that Steven Gerrard wants Ings and Watkins to be in the same team. He doesn't want to play them both up front. He wants them both to play in that front three and be interchangeable. And you've got to think that maybe that will suit Ings quite well, because when he played for Southampton in a 4-4-2, he tended to drop off and let Shay Adams make those runs into the box, and then he'd gather up what fell to the edge of the box. We know that he can drop deep and play the ball off like a Harry Kane, if you like. I think the 4-3-2-1 could suit him really well. And if him and Watkins are interchanging, and there's times where they both drop and Buendia or McGinn make that run forward, it causes all sorts of problems for any team that we play against. And when you've got a team like Norwich who will concede goals and who are languishing near the bottom of the league, and granted they're doing a lot better goal conceded wise since Smith's come in, as you mentioned, and Tim Krul is a very good goalkeeper, underrated, as I mentioned earlier. You're going to need to have a Premier League marksman who knows where the goal is up front. And Danny Ings, regardless of how he started for us, and he's still got quite a few goal contributions in a limited number of games he's played, he's Premier League quality. He's one of the best finishers in the Premier League still. One of England's best finishers, I believe, as well. I think he's better than Watkins at hitting the back of the net, if I'm being completely honest with you, if he had a run of form. So I'd start with him. So, yeah, for me, it'd be that same back five. You bring Sanson in for Nakamba, but with Louise holding, and then Ings comes in for Young. And I think that's the team that beats Norwich. Give Ings and Sanson 60 minutes. See how they go. You've got Chukwuemeka, you've got Ramsey, you've got Young, you've got El Ghazi, Archer, Viligence, Bidace, Trezeguet even, who can come on potentially if needed. And speaking of Trezeguet, I think Trezeguet plays potentially more as a striker under Steven Gerrard, or as that focal attacking point. Maybe we see him get some minutes as well if the game is going in our favour.
Well, yeah, I mean, in terms of he is going to be a player who's going to need to be brought back slowly, building up that fitness game by game. And in regards to Danny Ings, we talk to away fans, and pretty much all of them so far have mentioned Danny Ings and his goal scoring ability. So if he gets fit and in form, as you say, then yeah, I don't think there's many teams in the Premier League who wouldn't want him up front. And perhaps the narrow formation that Gerrard plays in the attacking sense, maybe that compromise between Ings and Watkins, because, you know, there was talk about players not wanting to play on the wing when it was a wider front three. So perhaps, as you mentioned, that narrow, interchangeable attacking three may potentially get the best out of both of them. And that would be good news for Villa in terms, it's been a dilemma so far under Dean Smith, getting them both in the same team didn't work. So if there is a magic formula, then that could be the best way for it. And Steven Gerrard will continue his upwards rise in the reputation of Villa fans. And
it will click tomorrow night. You guarantee that if those two click in a formation, it will be tomorrow night against Norwich. Just has to.
Well, in terms of the closest thing to a guarantee can be you predicting a Villa victory. So will you give the Villa fans potentially what they're hoping for and predict a Villa win tomorrow night?
I think tomorrow night is going to end up Norwich City 0, Aston Villa 3. I think we're going to get, I don't think it'll be as comfortable as we smashed them 3-0. I think we'll have to take our time, have to ride out the early onslaught, the first half an hour or so. But then when we can break, we're going to have to score one of our first breakaway chances. And I think that the natural flow then will just take over. We'll be able to keep possession. I think we'll be 3-0 up with about 20, 15 minutes left. And with that in mind, he'll then be able to start making the substitutions that he needs to prepare the team for Burnley. I'm comfortable with a 3-0 win. We'll win. We'll win tomorrow night. What about you?
Victory cigars all round with 20 minutes to go. But sadly, that champagne may need to be put on ice because I also think Villa are going to win. Which, to be home record, I have predicted the Brighton win, the Newcastle win. So there's been a few times I have predicted the win. But generally speaking, some of the adventurous away picks have not come to pass. So apologies in advance, but I'm going to temper it. So maybe get away with slightly more of a insert word here description. Some may say pessimistic, some say more balanced. We'll let the listeners decide. I think Norwich will score. I think it's going to be a tight game. Spinning between 2 or 3 for Villa. I think it's going to be 2. So I'm going 2-1 Villa. I do think in terms of it will be one of those games whereby there'll be an early onslaught relatively from Norwich. I think they are going to the players are going to go into the game thinking they can get something out of it, buoyed by Saturday against Man United, where they played quite well. I think there's going to be, some words from Dean Smith of encouragement, shall we say, going out. And so they will have a spring in their step because they'll feel like they have a little inside knowledge in terms of Villa because Dean Smith will be filling their ear with all stories Villa from his time in charge. So the advantage is they've only got 3 days to prepare for the game, as opposed to 2 weeks potentially if they've been in international break. But I think defensively, we've been relatively well organised, and Gerrard, certainly in comparison to earlier on in the season, I think we'll ride the storm. I'm looking in terms of the Palace game for inspiration in terms of how it's going to pan out. I mean, we were relatively comfortable in that game. There was a late goal for Palace to put a gloss on it, but it wasn't as though we were playing Samba-style football through Selhurst Park, but it was a professional job, and you could see the impact that Gerrard had made on the team. And I think that's going to continue tomorrow night. In terms of atmosphere, it's going to be tricky in a different way to Liverpool. Liverpool was, trying to downplay the affection. I don't think there's going to be too much affection in terms of from Norwich on Tuesday. But yeah, I think in terms of going into a place with that expectation of going to the win, and I think, arguably you could say this is the first game that Gerrard's been in charge of a Villa where the expectation is Villa win. I mean, you could arguably say Brighton, perhaps, but I think that was, kind of new manager bounce looking for rather than, a situation where we got now whereby you've got a month of Gerrard, you've got the games in the bank, and you're able to say, yeah, based on what we've seen so far and based on the opposition, you're expecting a win. And, that's going to be new territory for Gerrard in his managerial career at Villa. But I think we rise to it. I think we got the quality. I mean, in terms of talking about starting 11, there's potentially a few players who, if they don't start, are going to be able to come off the bench who, without being disrespectful to Norwich, I think our bench is going to be stronger than theirs. And so that is going to have an impact in the last half an hour or so. If we haven't seen what you are predicting by that time, and we're already 3-0 up, and we're bringing on, who to bring on? Trezeguet, maybe, just to... just to get some minutes in. But yeah, Villa win for me, 2-1, I'm going for. And, a return to winning ways after the defeat at Anfield on Saturday. But both sharing some optimism, which, whilst we are, basking in the hope of a Villa win, probably a good place to end our Norwich preview. I mean, there's, you've got to quit while you're ahead. I mean, we can't quit whilst we've won, unfortunately, because the game is still to play. But in terms of what you can do whilst you're waiting for kickoff, having already listened to this podcast, presumably because you're hearing me say these words right now, is you can go and check us out on our Twitter page at Talk Trinity if you haven't already done so. Go and have a listen or a watch of our previous podcasts on our YouTube channel at Talk Trinity, on audio podcast providers, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, some others that I'll leave Will to fill you in a moment. We got some international ones on there. We got some interviews with some guests on there. So more than enough for the 24 hours or so before kickoff to keep you entertained. And speaking of entertained, hope you've been entertained, maybe even enlightened, maybe been on a journey in terms of this podcast, this edition of Talk of the Trinity. So thank you very much for listening. I'll pass you over to Will for the final words. But from Baz, enjoy the game.
Yep, he is hoping to a Villa win. And let's hope that Steven Gerrard's Aston Villa come away from Carrow Road with all 3 points. As Baz said, we'll be back later on in the week to preview the Burnley game. And then there's even more games that are coming thick and fast. We may even have a guest for the Burnley game. We'll soon let you know. Anyway, from me, cheers, Tar. Thank you very much. Steven Gerrard's Clout and Blue Army, up the Villa.